give a warm welcome to the hosts of The Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins, and welcome back to Bride of Alternate Ending, the horror sideshow of the Alternate Ending podcast. I, am your co-ghost, Brennan Klein, and with me, as also always, is your co-ghost, Tim Brayton. Hi, Tim.
Hello. I think you did the same introduction that we had an episode or two ago, which means that it might be our proper introduction.
You know what?
Finally.
Maybe that's what it is. I think maybe my new thing is doing Crypt Keeper puns with no affect whatsoever.
I mean, I think that would be a great thing for the record.
Okay, I think I'll stick with it for now, for as long as I can remember, which is about 12 seconds.
Excellent.
But anyway, so yes, we are closing out the month of digging through the skeletons of the closets of people who were nominated for Oscars. For reasons I can't fully explain, Tim and I both decided that what we should do for our second week is look at the previous horror work of Angela Bassett, who's nominated this year for Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, her second nomination ever for the Academy Award, and we're going back to 1995 to watch her in Wes Craven's Vampire in Brooklyn, but it's also Eddie Murphy's Vampire in Brooklyn more than it belongs to anyone.
It is primarily Eddie Murphy's Vampire in Brooklyn, and I will say that I at least have one good reason to have made this choice. I had not previously seen Vampire in Brooklyn, so this is a bit of a box check for me, and I'm glad to have had something to kick me in the ass to do it. Now, why you would have agreed to see Vampire in Brooklyn, now that is a conundrum that I hope to have an answer to by the time that we are done with our chat today. Because I think that was a dumb idea of you, Brennan.
Yeah, I think so too. Actually, I liked it less I liked it less this time, and did not really like it that much the first time. But I am, as ever, a devoted Wes Craven scholar. I'm recording this a mere 7 inches away from an essay I wrote about Wes Craven that he signed.
All right. All right.
So I got to do what I got to do.
I don't need to know which 7 inches those are.
Okay. But yes, so that's just kind of what it is. And if nothing else, it is a curio. It is a very weird movie to have existed at all, but especially with the combination of people behind it. But so since we're kind of starting at Angela Bassett, remind me of the timeline. This is after her first nomination for What's Love Got to Do with It, right?
She is already Oscar nominee Angela Bassett at the time this movie comes out. Yes.
Okay. And I don't think we can fairly call this. Well, and this is probably several years later, right? Because that was like what, 91?
It is 2 years later.
2 years later. Okay. So this falls within the realm of that kind of Oscar curse thing of where it's like, Julianne Moore and Seventh Son or whatever it is that happened, like those kind of things. But as a black woman in Hollywood, you take what you can get. So this is less of that than normal, I would say.
I would agree. And also, just to further contextualize it in Angela Bassett's career, this is later in the same calendar year as Strange Days, the epic action, not bomb, but certainly film that did not do particularly well for itself. That's sort of the most pronounced collaboration between Catherine Bigelow and James Cameron. So it's a moment in her career where she's getting films that, if nothing else, have remained alive in the consciousness, even if they were not hits. And they were not.
I imagine Strange Days has had more of a reappraisal than Vampire in Brooklyn has, but Vampire in Brooklyn has not been reappraised by tens of people across the globe.
I've been assured that there has been some quantity of Vampire in Brooklyn reappraisal. Strange Days is great. Like, I don't know if you've seen it, but
I haven't. I should.
It's neither peak Bigelow nor peak Cameron, but even the combination of B-tier Bigelow and B-tier Cameron gets us to what I would consider to be a fairly estimable height. It is very much a film worth seeing. It's very much a film that's in desperate need of getting a nice, shiny Blu-ray, which has still not been released on Blu-ray because James Cameron makes sure every film he can slow down its path to home video, he does so, because he's a weirdo like that.
Yeah, well, he takes a lot of time to think about things, as we know. Why not take as long on a home video release as on a release to begin with?
Exactly.
But yes, so we are talking about Vampire in Brooklyn. So this came from a strange mishmash of basically Eddie Murphy, as far as I can recall, from what I've researched, like approached Wes Craven and was like, "I want to make a horror movie with you," and they were like, "Okay, great." I don't remember exactly. Someone might have put them together. I don't know if it was Eddie Murphy driving the ship or not. But essentially, Wes Craven was excited by the prospect of getting to make a movie with a more front and center comedy, and Eddie Murphy was excited by the prospect of making an actual straight horror movie. And this movie is something of an uncomfortable mishmash between those two things, with each of the main auteurs kind of bringing to the table the side of themselves that was less good at that part.
Yeah, it's a real their weaknesses combining.
Yeah, it's like
sort of affair.
It's like that old Reese's commercial, but when the two people around the corner crash into each other, one of them is holding vanilla and one of them is holding jelly, and then they're like, "You got your vanilla in my jelly." It's not Reese's. It's not. It's just the lesser part of each of those things.
I am not entirely confident where this strange hatred of jelly comes from, but yes,
it's not that it's okay. Maybe it's not that jelly is lesser than peanut butter, but it is not the thing that should be combined into.
To me, it's more like you got your sugar cone in my Wonder Bread. You got my Wonder Bread in your sugar cone.
That's fair.
I'm trying to eat a piece of Wonder Bread, but it keeps like poking into my palate with these like shards of sugar cone.
You know what? You are right. I like my metaphor as an abstract, but if you dig into it even a little bit, it collapses.
Because the thing is, vanilla and jelly sounds like something. Because like you're basically just saying, what if we take strawberry jelly and add vanilla flavor to it? It's like, ooh, I would try your strawberry vanilla jelly.
I mean, if you put it in like a cream puff or something, I guess
Exactly.
that's probably fine.
Notice how hard we're not talking about Vampire in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Okay. So Vampire in Brooklyn. It is. Well, it's from 1995. It is a very.
Which I wanna point out on top of everything else, if this exact constellation of talent had to come together to make a film that Eddie Murphy wanted to be scarier and Wes Craven wanted to be funnier and everything's going wrong anyway, 1995 is also a bad year for this constellation of talent to come together.
Yes,
I would say.
It's so weird because this is the movie that Craven made exactly between New Nightmare and Scream, which are, I know you have much higher regard for New Nightmare than for Scream, but I love both of those movies, and this is a weird interlude. But
It's a weird interlude. I also feel, and before I say what I'm about to say, I'll say Wes Craven has acknowledged this movie was a scaffold that got him to Scream. He has said that he would not have known how to handle the comedy in Scream if he hadn't fucked it up here. So I can't say if he'd done it later, it would have been... If he had done it later, maybe Scream would have been the terrible movie that everyone shits on, and Vampire in Brooklyn would be considered the film that launched postmodern horror. I don't know. I do feel like Scream is a better film than this, and that it is better at doing a thing this movie is really specifically bad at.
Yeah, and not to put words in your mouth, but I feel like the thing that grates against you the most with Scream is probably Kevin Williamson and not Wes Craven, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, so, you know, Wes did the thing that he was set out to do. Yeah, so that makes sense. But yeah, so it's Wes Craven not really knowing what he's doing and letting the ship kind of be driven by Eddie Murphy and by Eddie Murphy's co-screenwriters on the film, because Wes Craven is not involved in the screenplay for this at all. which is something he was starting to do more in the 90s. Probably actually immediately after New Nightmare flopped. But that's when he started taking on other people's scripts. Like, he didn't write on Scream, he didn't write on this, he didn't write on a lot of stuff later on.
Right. And I think it's worth pointing out, amongst the people who helped Eddie Murphy sort of write this, was his very own brother, Charlie Murphy. So this is definitely like a Eddie Murphy has controlled this. The Eddie Murphy, like, production unit, if there is such a thing, has controlled the existence of this thing.
Yeah, and that's the thing that makes it mysterious to me, though, because the story of it all is that, you know, Eddie Murphy wanted to make a straight horror film. So why did he do it this way? Because there are parts where it's like a little bit quippy, because that's what 90s horror is. Like, there's a confrontation in an alley where he rips out a guy's heart and he's like, just put a little heart into it. And that is the, you know, post Leprechaun, post Dr. Giggles, post whatever. Like, that's just what's happening in horror right now. So that's not like, oh, comedy horror. But then there's this big, dumb interlude where he's pretending to be a preacher and he's just clumping around the whole fucking joint. And
I think that was a very cunning use of verb, my good friend.
Thank you. But yeah, so it's, again, this is another movie where Eddie Murphy plays multiple characters. And while we haven't even introduced the character, he plays a vampire named Maximilian, who is from Egypt by way of Bermuda.
Yes.
But
which allows Eddie Murphy to do some real hair-raising accent work, FYI.
Oh yeah, it's a real patois. But yeah, so he's also playing these other characters that are explicitly comedy characters. He's playing this weird preacher. He's playing this weird kind of junkie robber guy who is he supposed to be in whiteface? He's in
whiteface. He is, I believe, playing an Italian at that point.
Okay, that is the impression that I got from his performance, but the whiteface is not. It is. He just looks ill.
He's no the Wayans brothers and White Girls, that's for sure.
Yeah, it is. It just looks like. It's just grim. He needs some Aquaphor. His skin is kind of
pretty
like
nasty to look at.
It actually, I mean, it sells the idea that this guy is maybe on meth, because it just looks like he's covered in open sores as opposed to being a white person.
Mm-hmm.
Or even a cartoon white person.
Right.
But anyway, so he's doing this, and this I don't imagine is something that Wes Craven asked for. I don't think Wes Craven asked for anything. He was just going along for the ride on this one.
Yeah, I will say, in defense of Wes Craven, this was not a salvageable project, and I don't think Wes Craven is doing anything to make it worse.
No, if anything, the two little things... Actually, there are a couple little moments where I can see that is a Wes moment, and those are always the best moments. And we'll get to that. I am a little distracted because this movie is a little distracted, too.
Yeah, no, it's... I'll be curious to hear what those moments are, because I didn't catch any moments that stood out to me as being the work of a director who had any enthusiasm for the material at all, but I would certainly love to know what your moments would be when we get to that point.
Yeah.
We're doing just a piss poor job of getting through this movie's plot.
We are. Yes. So really briefly, so Maximilian the vampire, he shows up Dracula style on a ghost ship full of corpses that crashes into New York
It's
Harbor.
a straight up Dracula remake.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so he crashes into the Brooklyn Harbor, where John Witherspoon works, I guess, and he's also a landlord. Question mark?
Maybe.
I don't
go with
know.
that.
Yeah. So anyway, John Witherspoon of Friday, and he plays Granddad in the Boondocks. He's playing Silas Green. He encounters a big old wolf that turns into a man later on. That man, Maximilian. He is in Brooklyn. He's looking for the only living descendant of his vampire clan, and that living descendant, wouldn't you know it, is a half vampire. That fact doesn't play into anything, which is doesn't feel right.
It doesn't, like, it doesn't appear that prior to her encounter with Maximilian that she is in any way, like, vampire leaning.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense other than the fact
like
that
she is just Armina. Like, there's no...
Yeah, like from top to bottom, like it never really plays in at all. Except for the fact that the cinematographer didn't really know how to shoot black skin, so she looks kind of gray a lot of the time. But that's not on purpose. But yeah, so she is playing Detective Rita Vader? I have it written down. I didn't hear it spoken out loud.
Yeah.
But she is, I guess, on the case of boat. And I guess the murders on the boat.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, and she has a very hilarious New York boss who's like has the thickest accent.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, so Rita has this partner named Justice, because that's the name of a cop.
It's nominative determinism is what I believe they call that.
Oh, yeah. Played by New Jack City's Alan Payne. They are in this weird thing where she acts like she's his jealous girlfriend, even though they haven't acknowledged that they like each other, and also they work together. It's all very...
Yeah, it would be like so much a professional violation for them to get together, which of course is why they spend the entire film quasi-flirting. Good times.
They need a better HR department at this precinct, especially, again, to jump around in the scene where he's in whiteface and he's like trying to provoke her into getting mad at him, and she slaps him in the bullpen in front of everyone. And anyway, and that's a cop slapping a cop, so other cops would actually care. But yeah, so we've got they're like kind of sort of on the case of these murders. They kind of are lackadaisically wandering around Brooklyn trying to figure these things out. Maximilian has recruited his very own Renfield, which is Julius Jones, played by Kadeem Hardison of A Different World and White Men Can't Jump. This is a really stacked cast. But so basically he becomes a quote-unquote ghoul, which is like basically it's like Renfield plus the thing that happens to Griffin Dunn in American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
Like, he's becoming more and more decayed and disgusting and gross, and pieces of him are falling off. And so together they're trying to help Eddie Murphy seduce Angela Bassett and turn her into a vampire to, I guess, make more vampires.
Yeah, it's never like out and out stated that he wants her to become his new vampire queen, but that's like the only way to make sense of it, I think.
Yeah, like, actually, he has a singular motivation through this entire movie, and you still don't really know. You know what he's doing, but not why he's doing it.
It's like he is the last of the Bermudan Egyptian vampires, and he doesn't like that fact, so he's gone out to find another one. And that's sort of what we get as far as motivation goes. And what happens after she becomes a vampire feels like a real question mark to me.
Yeah, it's this kind of loosey-goosey, just lackadaisical film where nothing really matters.
And like I can to a certain extent fill things in on the assumption of, well, I've read Dracula, I've seen many film versions of Dracula, we'll assume it's that.
Yeah.
It also, to a certain extent, feels like the motivation is, hey, you guys, wasn't it fun making Coming to America?
Oh my God, yeah.
Let's do that again.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because it's Eddie Murphy showing up with a comic accent. Not a comic accent, but just like, it's comic because it's bad.
It's a quote-unquote comic accent that you can sort of, if you aim your gun with the widest sights at something just generally African, you might hit that accent.
Yeah, I mean, to me it felt like, you know, like a little bit French, like kind of a Haiti vibe.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's not French in it.
Yeah, it's it's open-hearted. Anything can come in and go at any time.
And I will say, it more or less feels like the same accent.
Okay, yeah, that
across
is true.
the course of the movie. Like it doesn't feel like whatever he's doing, he's doing it. He figured out he could do some voice, even if that voice sounds like what it's like a community theater person trying to do like posh.
Yeah.
It's kind of this nothing doesn't tell me anything about you, can't connect it to anything else, but I can tell that you at least made a choice.
Yeah, he's doing the Robert Downey Jr. and Doolittle thing, where it's fully a mystery, but it's deeply committed.
Yes, that is a great comparison to make. So he's doing that. We don't really know why he's doing the things he's doing. And eventually he either does or does not get stopped. The end.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you said, it's Dracula. It's that, but it's in Brooklyn, and it is very much in the vein of the like black comedy scene that was happening in the 90s and early 2000s.
Absolutely.
And for better and worse, I think the thing that's most interesting about it is that it does exist on a continuum with the likes of, Friday and I mean, there's like a lot of like 2000s comedies that it would be leading into, like Barbershop, like those big like black ensemble comedies.
Right.
The Best Man, Brothers. That's a great one. I love that movie. But it's on this. It's this weird outlier there, but it feels ensconced in that culture and world, which is very random for a Wes Craven movie.
It is, and it specifically feels, and the story as I've read it, and I haven't seen an actual source on this, but multiple online people all seem to have landed on this. Apparently, there was friction between Eddie Murphy and Paramount, who he had a contract with Paramount that he had to produce one more movie. This was that one more movie, after which he was done working with Paramount, but apparently there was something involving... he gave them this in exchange for the rights to remake The Nutty Professor, which was his very next film. Mm-hmm. And it really does feel, in some ways that are not to its benefit on any level, like he wanted to start trying out some ideas for The Nutty Professor on this film set.
Yeah,
up to and including the wacky characters and makeup thing.
Yeah, and that's the thing I was talking about, where he's like, he gives a full sermon as a preacher about evil, and it's like, oh, it's hilarious because he's talking about vampire things. And he played multiple characters in Coming to America.
In Coming to
right?
America,
like this
yeah.
was his thing already.
This was his second time doing it. He had done it in Coming to America, yes.
Interesting. That's so weird that. Like this movie really does have one foot. It has 18 feet, and they're all in a different genre.
Right.
Because they're doing the Eddie Murphy multiple characters, they're doing the horror, they're doing the black comedy, they're doing American Werewolf with Kadeem Hardison, which those are the parts of the comedy that I probably like the most. But that's because it reminds me of American Werewolf. Because Kadeem Hardison has very much come from the Chris Tucker school of yammering,
yes,
which gets pretty grating pretty quickly.
It gets pretty grating pretty quickly. It also, I think, really leaves this movie... It sends it out the door on a really bad note, because the final scene is basically entirely dedicated to that in a way that I found... Like, the final scene was like half of this film's running time, subjectively.
Yeah, because like, I think John Witherspoon is doing a better job of that thing, but when it's just the two of them pinging off each other, he does not find a.
It's just you're in a labyrinth, you're looking for the way out, and you just keep turning and finding dead ends, and so you just have to keep letting it happen at you. And I will say, without any real enthusiasm, John Witherspoon is giving my favorite performance in this film. So, like, I agree with you that he's certainly doing the yammering thing better. He's occasionally even doing the yammering thing well, and in a way that made me chuckle.
Well, because, he knows what he's doing. He doesn't have a lot to work with, but, he's a veteran.
That's very true.
Been doing this a long time.
But no, we were starting to enumerate the genres here, and I think it's worth landing on what I think to be true, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here.
Okay.
This is Wes Craven's only vampire film, correct?
Yeah. He did dabble for a while. He made one vampire movie, made one zombie movie, which was Serpent in the Rainbow. Made one werewolf movie, which was the aptly named Cursed, which, that poor production.
I cannot wait until we have somehow come up with the terrible idea that we need to do Cursed as an episode of this podcast.
I would love to revisit Cursed. Like, I approached Vampire in Brooklyn with optimistic trepidation, but Cursed I would just throw myself into, even though it's a disaster.
All right, that's fair. And it is tough to talk about this as a Wes Craven film because it's just not really.
And the opening credits announce that. It says an Eddie Murphy production of a Wes Craven film.
It does indeed. But I do think that's of inherent interest, that this is the one time Wes Craven gets to work in one of the quintessential horror subgenres. And indeed, it is not merely a vampire film. It's Dracula. Like, this is a remake of Dracula. So it's Wes Craven making Dracula. That's something. It's not something that really shows up on screen, but I think it's something that one at least wants to grapple with, even if in the act of grappling one realizes that it's basically just like a handful of like feathers from a pillow. Like, there's nothing there. It just kind of floats away.
It does kind of float away, but I think here's the right point for me to bring in the things that were Wes Craven-y that I did like. They're very few and far between, and they don't interact well with the rest of the movie, but that's because each individual scene is its own kind of lump. It's an island in a sea of yammering. But there is an early nightmare sequence when Angela Bassett gets this weird sense that she's being stalked, because she is. But she has this sequence where she's coming home, the door is starting to be pounded by an unseen force outside, and then the window bursts open and the curtains flutter in, and then it turns out she's having a nightmare. And that does feel like, Elm Street Wes Craven briefly woke up and found something to do.
No, for sure. And I don't even know that the moment, quote unquote, works, but it does at least. It feels like it's trying to do something that uses the visual language of horror.
Yeah. And
that's a nice treat in the context of this motion picture. I think it goes on for too long. And I also think the getting out of the nightmare, when we cut to the overhead shot of Angela Bassett in bed screaming. That is silly looking to me. Like, she's just like windmilling her legs.
Oh yeah.
Trying to kick the blanket off, and it's great because both Craven and Bassett are committing to that moment in a way that it should have turned out, I think, better than it did, but whatever. It's still, that moment has a pulse, and I like that it has a pulse.
Yeah, and Angela Bassett, she is kind of unmoored in this movie. Like, there are moments she overplays and moments she underplays, because what could you do with this character?
Exactly. I think that there is a line of reasoning that we hear all throughout the ages, but I think we're hearing it really, really loudly. Excuse me. I think we're hearing it really, really loudly this particular winter because she is marching towards an Oscar. Angela Bassett she can't save anything, but she will always at least come out and give you a good performance, even on a sinking ship. And I think Vampire in Brooklyn calls that into question. She's got nothing to work with. I don't want to say that this is her not giving her all, because she is certainly giving her all. but it feels like an example of her trying out things that aren't working, getting zero feedback as to whether they worked or not, and so she's just kind of hoping for the best.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think here's the thing, because if there's the thing of Wes Craven wants to make a comedy, Eddie Murphy wants to make a horror movie but can't help but make a comedy, and then none of Angela Bassett's scenes are comic at all.
No, she is, partially because of the way the scenes were written, partially I think because of how she's approaching it. She's a character actor. I mean, she knows how to dive into a character's brain and sort of tease out what's happening there. Hers all feel... You know, it's that old joke, like you ask, an actor, what's this film about? And he says, well, it's about this young man who has to go to his grandfather's house. And then you ask the other actor, what's this movie about? And it's like, well, it's about this grandfather who has a young man come to his house. Uh-huh. She is clearly playing, it's about this New York cop who's investigating a vampire. Like, yes. She's made the film about that character in a way that if absolutely anyone else on that production team was supporting her, we might have had something.
Yes. Because I would say all of the best moments involve her. Like there's another good sequence. A couple times the editing kind of comes alive. Like there's a sequence where she's investigating at this like Caribbean bar ? And there's this cobra that's kind of batting at this glass cage while she's talking.
The cobra scene, again, at least it's something.
Yeah.
I don't understand what's happening in that scene, but it is something. As you say, it's at least well edited. There's some really remarkable, like, close-up shots of a cobra on a table. Like, just kind of... The cobra's like half the frame. It's like, okay... Didn't know that shot was going to happen in this movie, but it's striking. It threw me. I liked it.
Yeah.
What the hell is happening?
It is not ours to question why. And then the other sequence that kind of uses cross-cutting to some effect is, if I recall correctly, it's the murder of her roommate.
Yes.
But she kind of does this automatic painting thing. Like she kind of goes into a trance and can paint the future, I guess. And when you're seeing that happen, I think that has a kind of energy to it that the rest of the movie tends to lack.
I would agree. And again, that to me is about 80% on the editing, which is getting very like harsh and jaggedy in ways that work for those moments. But yeah, no, I mean, Bassett she's trying, but she's not pulling all of the attempts into like a unified character because there's no way to do so.
And she could have if someone was paying attention. Exactly.
If Wes Craven had made the decision at some point, okay, I'm not going to get anything with Eddie Murphy, but I can land on Angela. I can make something out of this. That would have been, I think, a strategy. It would have required that Wes Craven be awake. And he wasn't.
Yeah.
At
all. No, he really wasn't. Which is a bummer. But is there any moment in Bassett's performance where you were like, okay, I see, like, this is working?
I
mean,
like,
any sort of sustained minute.
That's the thing. It's like every moment she's making good choices. She's just not on a scene-by-scene basis making the same good choices. Mm-hmm. That being said, I actually would probably also land on the restaurant scene as being one that sort of feels better in terms of what she's doing.
Yeah. And I think she completely loses track of the character at the same time that the movie does, which is when she becomes a vampire.
Yes.
But I think that the moment she becomes a vampire is well performed, where they're kind of dancing in his apartment, and she's kind of gone into this trance, and she's kind of distracted, and he's talking to her, and she's responding in this kind of airy, absent way, and I thought that was pretty good.
That was good. I would also say the moment when she sees her reflection disappear, and she's terrified because she realizes what that means, that is overplayed in a way that I enjoyed. Even though I don't think there's a single other beat that she overplays in that same sort of like campy, ham-bone B-movie register.
I mean, other than her waking up from that nightmare.
That is a weird moment. I don't even know what register that moment's being played in. But No, I did like that moment. Like it was a real big no type of thing, and I always enjoy actors who are not too self-conscious to go for the big no.
Yeah, and that's nice. This is this was a bad moment for Angela Bassett, and nobody blames her.
No.
I think she's kind of like Cyclops of the X-Men. Like she has so much raw, unrestrained acting power that she just blasts out like a spotlight, and you kind of need someone to put the glasses on her and focus it somewhere.
Right.
And that's just it. Yeah.
And she's not getting it from her scene partners. She's not getting it from her director. She's not getting it from the script. So she is untethered. It's just this kind of ball of Angela Bassett careening around, smashing into a movie that already doesn't have a shape. Like nothing about this movie is coming together, and then you add this sort of very, very heavy, intense performance of a lady cop trying to like figure out what's going on while also dealing with her own figurative and literal demons. It's one of those like this is like a very good performance that is better than this film deserves, but also it's so much better than the film deserves that it kind of further destabilizes the films. Like it's that kind of situation, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like she's in this kind of so if a movie is a building and this one is just this kind of crumbling ruin, and she is this like will-o'-the-wisp of light who's bouncing around, sometimes knocking down a column, sometimes just disappearing behind one for minutes at a time.
Right.
And there are other, I guess maybe the thing is that every actor is in a different movie also.
Not only is every actor in a different movie, Eddie Murphy himself is in at least 2 different movies.
Very much. Yeah, he is in Nutty Professor 8 and Dracula.
It would be very tough, I think, to oversell the degree to which the Eddie Murphy plays a vampire playing a preacher sequence feels like it was airlifted in just from a different continent.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think it is worse than the white-faced Guido tweaker guy? Because I think that one is even less motivated and so much longer, it feels.
It feels longer, and obviously the makeup, like, at least the makeup when he's playing the preacher, it's like, okay, well, you've made Eddie Murphy appear to be a jowlier version of himself. The Guido makeup is just shockingly bad.
Well, he looks like the Anthropophagus. He looks like they put oatmeal on his face and it's chipping away.
So in that respect, I would certainly have to say that sequence is worse. And as you say, it feels so much longer. But it also feels he's not swinging so hard in that one, it doesn't feel to me. And that's part of what really gets to me about the preacher sequence. He's doing like a full-on Eddie Murphy comedy routine.
Yes.
And it is enervating in this context. Like, I am just completely exhausted watching him riff on like, oh no, I'm an evil demon from hell, but I have to speak to a Christian congregation. However will I fake it? That is a joke that doesn't have legs. And it's trying to walk on them anyway.
Yeah, no, and there are a couple of these really weird sitcom setups where it's like he's pretending to be a preacher to try and influence her in one direction, and then the congregation shows up and is like, preacher, give us your sermon, and he's like, oh no, I gotta do this now. And it's just like these weird farces that kind of just crop up for no reason and really just they take you on these long detours that
they do.
The movie did not need.
And both of them give me such strong, like, hey, remember when Eddie Murphy ruined Mulan vibes?
Ha!
And I think that also makes me slightly more hostile towards that performance than I might otherwise be. Because I do remember when Eddie Murphy ruined Mulan, and I hate it.
Oh, yeah. No, that's that like, bouncing off the walls that he, that became Donkey in Shrek, too.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, what a time he had in the 90s to 2000s.
And like, and this is it's sort of a low ebb for him. I mean, he had ups and downs multiple times. I mean, he hits Nutty Professor, and that becomes a pretty distinct up for him before he trows out again, and we hit things like Meet Dave. But this was a bad stretch for Eddie Murphy. I don't remember when his last hit had been prior to, I was so careful to make sure I knew where this was in Angela Bassett's career. I should have figured out where this was in Eddie Murphy's career, because it's obviously much more salient. But I do know that when Nutty Professor came in, it was sort of a like, oh, thank God, he's like capable of making a movie that people don't just despise.
Okay.
It had been a bit.
Yeah, between like Trading Places and Coming to America.
Yeah, so this is like the immediate follow up to Beverly Hills Cop 3, which is sort of a notorious underperformer. It's certainly everybody's least favorite Beverly Hills Cop movie. And that is the film that came sort of right on the heels of The Distinguished Gentleman and Boomerang. And those directly followed another 48 Hours. Like, at this point, I mean, Boomerang is like pretty clearly the standout, at least commercially, between Coming to America in 1988 and The Nutty Professor in 1996. And it's just like a whole bunch of him flailing around like a loud idiot for several films running. Harlem Nights is part of that run. It's like, and this is grim.
Did Boomerang have the cachet then that it does now?
It was all I could do to come up with the titles of what he was in, so I'm not actually sure that it made a profit. I will quickly see if I can figure out how much money Boomerang, and maybe The Distinguished Gentleman also at least turned a profit. I should figure that out. But
yeah, no worries.
It's entirely possible that it did not.
If you will allow for an extreme distraction, it is very interesting to me, because there are movies that I've heard about just for whatever reason that either came out before I was born or before I was paying attention to these things, that when I finally research how they performed at the time, sometimes it kind of blows my mind. Like last night, I just watched 3,000 Miles to Graceland, which is the Kurt Russell, Courtney Cox heist road action movie. And I'd heard about this movie from several different places, and I finally looked it up and found out it was this enormous failure in the box office, which I did not know from how often it has been mentioned around me.
Yeah, no. I am mostly just curious how it's possible that you live in a world where 3,000 Miles to Graceland gets that kind of like constant buzz. I
wouldn't say it has been like lauded by anyone to me, but it definitely it's a title that, at least when it is brought up, it sticks in my brain because it's an interesting title.
It is, and I mean it is an interesting movie in the development of Kurt Russell, if that is a thing that you care about, and it's not something to not care about.
Yeah, and it's an interesting movie in the development of Courtney Cox.
Also true.
But anyway, we're not talking about that. Sorry. So yes.
No. So just to pin down, another 48 Hours and Boomerang were both small but unambiguous hits. Everything else was a flop, it looks like.
Yikes. Okay. So yeah. So this did not help. So yeah. Thank you, Nutty Professor, I guess. At least on Eddie Murphy's behalf. But yes. So let's get back. Other Wes Craven things. There are a couple of moments where it's like, where he maybe poked his head out. He did cast a couple people that he'd worked with before, and he would actually work with Angela Bassett again. She was in his Meryl Streep movie Music of the Heart.
That's correct, she was, which was, I believe, the only other time in his career that Wes Craven had really tried hard to make a not Wes Craven film, and to better effect than this, but I think he has a thing that he can do, and he needed to do it, and that's what we learn from the attempts of Wes Craven to make non-Wes Craven films.
Yeah, although I would say, I think to a lesser degree in terms of genre, but Red Eye is probably his best attempt to make a not horror film, but it's still a like tension-based film. Anyway, so yeah, Music of the Heart is so much more. It goes down smoother than Vampire in Brooklyn, although it's just not an interesting movie to have been made by anyone.
The bar for mediocre Oscar bait in the late 90s is certainly, like, just the fact of it is going to work out better than a mediocre horror comedy in 1995.
Yes, exactly. And there is a hilarious part where Meryl Streep is testing the posture of the people who are of the kids who are playing violin, and there's a girl who she does not know has some sort of leg dysfunction, so she shoves this girl, and the girl just goes flying into the wall.
I mean, I don't remember that beat, but it seems to have been really funny, so I will take your word for it.
It's very funny. Not intentionally. Anyway, so yes, so he's working with people he's worked with before. So the guy who plays Dr. Zako, he was the kind of voodoo priest in Serpent in the Rainbow. And also there is a brief, very random cameo from The People Under the Stairs, and of course Twin Peaks is Wendy Roby. And I think she's doing a great camp cameo.
I mean, it is the actual best performance in this film, but since it is a cameo, it would feel uncharitable to count it. But yes, she's in it. She's quite good. The other random cameo that really just threw me, the first person he kills upon arriving in Brooklyn. I mean, he's already killed a boat full of dock workers or whatnot, but boat workers. There's these two like heavily Italian thugs who come up and threaten him, and the one whom he actually makes the heart pun to is Mitch Pileggi of the X-Files.
Oh, and Mitch Pileggi was the lead in Shocker that Wes Craven made.
Which was Shocker.
That was 89.
That was 89. Okay, I was like, had Shocker already happened? But apparently it had very much already happened. So that actually makes it feel a little bit better if it's a cameo from Mitch Pileggi of Shocker than a cameo from Mitch Pileggi of the X-Files, because I was confused why, because it's very obviously a cameo. It's not just like, I got this guy to play this one day role.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like the X-Files and that character by 1995 would have had enough cachet to have cameoed in this movie. So that makes more sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, and since I totally forgot that scene existed, because yeah, the other guy in that scene, it's Jesus Garcia, but he was using the name Nick Corey at the time. But that's the guy from Rod from Nightmare on Elm Street, the boyfriend of the Tina who dies on the roof on the ceiling.
Okay, sure.
So there's a lot of like little mini. He's a little bit doing a victory lap here, which is kind of random.
Yep. It's like doing a victory lap when you don't realize that you're in 7th place and your car is on fire out in the parking lot.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, God, do you have anything else to say about Vampire in Brooklyn?
Here's the thing, is like, obviously it would be worth winding down, but we haven't actually talked about what I think is the central thing we need to talk about.
Okay.
We've been talking around it. Wes Craven directing a broad comedy. It's just kind of mesmerizing how much it doesn't work. And like, again, this movie's already at war with itself, taking Wes Craven out of it entirely. Eddie Murphy wants to make a horror film. Paramount's like, no, you're going to make an Eddie Murphy comedy. So they sort of retrofit Eddie Murphy comedy scenes onto this horror film. It's already real bad. It's not working. So you have all of these comedy scenes that are bad. They're bad scenes. Mm-hmm. And you're handing them off to a director who's never made a comedy. Who's never really even made a film that has successful comic relief that I'm aware of at this point. And
he has made films with comic relief, but successful is the clincher there.
Here's kind of what I'm specifically thinking of, and what I kept thinking of throughout this movie. Last House, the 1972 film. The cops in Last House on the Left, which maybe in the world there are people who think that the cops are brilliant, a sort of contrasting, counter melody to the rest of that film. I think the cops in Last House surely must be in the conversation for the all-time worst comic relief in any horror movie.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and there maybe the only other thing I can think of off the top of my head is also Cops, the ones from Halloween 5.
Another great choice.
Thank you
for that title.
But it's at least top 3.
But I mean, so the one time, and I haven't seen every Wes Craven film between 1972 and 1995, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here. The one time that I'm aware of that he's going for comedy for straight up, I will be. The scene's point is to make you laugh. It's not a skill set that he has demonstrated that he has, and it turns out to be a skill set that he doesn't have, at least in my estimation. I think he's just, he does not know what to do with those scenes. So even in the limited way that Eddie Murphy in Latex in The Nutty Professor can generate some laughs. Like, I don't think The Nutty Professor is a mirthless film. I think it sort of works as a dumb comedy. Those exact same impulses here are just the worst thing. I do think that the two big comedy scenes are probably my least favorite part of this film. The preacher scene and the Guido scene.
While you were saying that, I was thinking about, because while I have not seen his TV movies, I have seen every one of Wes Craven's theatrically released movies. I think you're right, because he does have a tendency for comic relief lines or moments or tiny little things, like, you know, like Rod in Nightmare on Elm Street saying, like, "Up yours" with a twirling lawnmower, and things that don't work. But you're right. I think you can really draw a direct line between those cops in Last House and then the comedy here. And the comedy in Last House is born from the fact that that movie is so otherwise so mirthless and draining and horrible to experience. That it kind of makes it doesn't work, but it kind of makes sense that the comedy is so shrill, coming from the same artistic impulses that the horror comes from.
Right.
But his comedy has not really progressed in the 25-ish years. Yeah.
And it's a different thing, because as you say, Last House is such an unrelenting, in your face, punishing, like, just depiction of brutality. And Vampire in Brooklyn is never entirely confident if it's more of a horror movie or more of a comedy. Because, like, you have the scene where Eddie Murphy's in Latex. You have all the scenes with I'm suddenly drawing a blank on the younger man's name, Kadeem Hardison and John Witherspoon, which are emphatically played for comedy. And you have little, like, beats within that played for comedy. And even when Eddie Murphy is trying to play like completely straight, threatening but sexy vampire figure, he's still doing it with kind of a smirk, because that's how he does anything, is with kind of a smirk. So you already have this movie that's, like, so much more in a comic mode, so the extreme comedy elements are ruining it in a different way than the extreme comedy does in Last House. And I had the one film that I have not seen of Wes Craven's, and I'm guessing you haven't, because as you said, you haven't seen his TV films, and I'm fairly sure that's what it is. But he made that Disney film. It has some super generic name, but it's I believe from the 80s.
Well, are you talking about, like, the Wonderful World of Disney episode he made?
Yes.
No, I've not seen that.
What is it called? It's
God,
like
I don't.
Casebusters.
Yeah.
That feels like it is likely to be comic to me. I don't know.
Probably. Yeah, that is a weird blip that I haven't really looked into. I'm going to at some point, because it is my solemn duty, but I'm saving some of the TV stuff
That's fair. You want to end on a high note. I get it.
Exactly. But yeah, I'll at least try to track that down, because I never thought of it as a movie, but because it is the Wonderful World of Disney thing, it probably is at least an hour, right? Like some sort of, like, weird feature-esque.
Yeah, I mean, that was from a period when Wonderful World of Disney was more of a, like, shell for a made-for-TV movie. Okay, it is apparently 45 minutes long.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's why I never bothered really even thinking about it. Yeah, I'll have to find out. But yeah, it's not working here. It's maybe less obnoxious than the comedy cops, but that's just because very few things are more obnoxious. But it also has, there is less movie. It is more present, but also it's less good of a movie for it to sink, so it kind of just feels less irritating in some way, or at least you can start to get inured against it because you're like, well, that's what this is doing.
That's very fair. So I guess my question, to get to the point I was aiming at, does this movie work better? Is Vampire in Brooklyn a better film if we replace Wes Craven with a director who can handle comedy?
That is an interesting question, because definitely I've seen a lot of people throw around the idea of what if Eddie Murphy had actually made this with John Landis, who he worked with a lot.
Right.
I don't know. To be completely honest, I have not seen any of Murphy's prior collaborations with Landis, which I know I should. But so I don't know how that worked when it was more of a straight comedy anyway, at least to my tastes. But I think in 1995, you're still going to be... That car is being driven by Eddie Murphy, but it is also being driven by where horror was in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just... That's such a tiny, tiny, tiny needle to thread that I still don't know that it would have happened.
I don't think it would have been better. This is something I've been sort of rolling around with. That's part of why I asked you the question, because I don't have a solid answer to it. But I don't think it. I think the comedy elements aren't good. They are being made worse because they are being handled by a director who doesn't know what to do with comedy. Mm-hmm. But I still think the best case scenario of this is still not a good film, because I don't think the comedy bits are working, and I think they are misbegotten from the ground up.
Yeah, no, it's just a complete mistake, especially because there's not a way for them to blend with the horror here. Mm-hmm. It really is two distinct movies, neither of which are good, just at war with one another.
That's really exactly what we're saying here,
and whoever wins, we lose.
Yes, perfect way to sum it up. So yes, that actually probably does do it for me in Vampire in Brooklyn, unless you have other thoughts you wanted to share.
I mean, there is a part where Eddie Murphy kind of explodes a dog and launches it into the bay, which is kind of funny.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
It works by the standard of the comedy in this film.
Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, it's kind of depressing. Look, if it got us to scream, I'm fine with it. But it is what it is. I'm done with that. Tim and I still need to talk about what we're doing next month, so I'm not going to announce it. But if you're on the Patreon, keep an eye out. We'll talk about something that's less depressing than this question mark.
Hopefully.
We'll find out.
The Patreons have a tendency to not give us that out, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we certainly shall. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. If you're a member of the Patreon at any level, that poll will be coming out. Probably will actually already be out by the time that you hear this. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. If you want to watch a better Wes Craven movie, watch almost any of them.
Any of them.
New Nightmare or Scream, the little sandwich that we got there. That's some delicious bread. Just throw out the meat.
Pretty much, it's like you got this wonderful artisan sourdough, and oh no, we forgot to check the turkey for mold.
Exactly. But yeah, until whatever we're talking about next, thanks so much for listening. Find more of my stuff and Tim's at alternateending.com, and just have a nice time. It's hard out there. Bye, everybody.